All right, good afternoon. The Secretary General spoke this morning at the high-level debate on the General Assembly marking the 15th anniversary of the adoption of the UN Convention Against Corruption. He stressed that corruption affects developed and developing countries alike, with complicity knowing no borders. Those who can least afford corruption suffer the most, he added. Corruption fuels conflict, undermines recovery, and breeds frustration. In efforts to root out and eradicate corruption at all levels and restore trust where it has been lost, the role of the United Nations is crucial, the Secretary General said, noting that since its adoption, the Convention Against Corruption has achieved near global acceptance with 184 parties. The Secretary General stressed that he will not achieve a lasting impact without the full engagement and support of the business and financial communities. We also need civil society, a free press, and young people to continue bringing to light corrupt practices and holding individual businesses and governments to account. This morning, the Deputy Secretary General, Mina Mohammed, spoke at a special meeting entitled Towards Sustainable, Resilient, and Inclusive Societies Through Participation for All. She told participants that achieving the 2030 agenda will greatly depend on the involvement of not just governments, but also local authorities, civil society, indigenous people, scientists, and business alike. This is an agenda that needs to be achieved with the people, she stressed, adding that as intolerance, marginalization, and xenophobia grows in some countries, we must redouble our efforts to engage and listen to the full spectrum of views in society. We cannot exclude people, especially the most vulnerable among us, from taking part in processes that impact their daily lives, she concluded. The outcome of today's meeting will feed into the high-level political forum expected to take place in July. And just a reminder, the Secretary General will be off to Switzerland this afternoon, where he will speak to students at the University of Geneva tomorrow. The Secretary General intends to focus on his disarmament agenda in his remarks to students. And from Geneva, he will travel on to Montpellier, where he will participate in a retreat bringing together all of the special representatives, all of his special representatives. Back here, Nikolai Mladenov, the Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, briefed the Security Council via video conference this morning. He discussed how the violence on May 14th was a reminder of how easily violence in Gaza flares up. He said we must act urgently to avoid another war, to alleviate the suffering of people, and to empower the Palestinian government to take up its responsibilities in Gaza. He welcomed the move by Egypt to maintain the opening of the Rafah crossing throughout the holy month of Ramadan. This is an important step, and the Special Coordinator hopes that the security situation will allow for more regular movements of crossing. He also acknowledged Israel's efforts to ensure delivery of goods, delivery of goods to Gaza, despite the serious damage done at the Karim Shalom crossing by protesters in recent weeks. And he looks forward to the further measures that will enable an increase in the entry of goods and stimulate economic activity. He added that turning the Gaza tap on and off is not a sustainable strategy. We must break this cycle of risk more lethal consequences. Ultimately, he said, the success of any initiative in Gaza is linked to a credible political horizon that unites all Palestinians. And our humanitarian colleagues in Syria tell us that since May 15th, more than 7,000 people at sites for displaced people in rural Damascus have returned to eastern Ghouta following 2 months of displacement. The UN is providing humanitarian aid through the Syrian Arab Red Crescent to those who remained or those who have returned in eastern Ghouta, but we've not been able to access that area to undertake our own deliveries. The UN humanitarian delivery last UN humanitarian delivery was on May 15th, when assistance was provided to Douma. The UN continues to call on all parties and those with influence over them to allow safe, sustained, and unimpeded humanitarian access to all in need in line with their obligations of international humanitarian law. It is also imperative that all displaced be allowed to return voluntarily in safety and dignity to their homes as soon as the situation allows, and that freedom of movement of civilians be ensured by all parties active on the ground. And our peacekeeping colleagues tell us that on the 21st of May, of the 21st of May, this year, the African Union UN mission in Darfur, UNAMID, received reports of a confrontation between Rapid Support Forces personnel and internally displaced people in the Kamza Daig IDP camp in Zalinge in central Darfur, resulting in 1 death and injuries among the displaced people. This triggered demonstrations which led to further injuries and arrests of internally displaced people. UNAMID evacuated the UN and non-governmental organization personnel in its camp, stepped up its patrols, and maintained a regular presence in and around the camp. Yesterday, a verification mission comprised of UNAMID and humanitarian personnel reported that the situation has calmed down and that humanitarian workers have returned. UNAMID continues to engage with the relevant authorities to monitor the situation. I also want to flag that today in Geneva, the World Health Assembly delegates agreed on a new strategic plan for the next 5 years. The organization's 13th general program of work is designed to help the world achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, with particular focus on SDG 3, ensuring healthy lives and promoting well-being for all ages at age 2030. It sets 3 targets to ensure that by 2023, 1 billion more people benefit from universal health coverage, 1 billion more people are better protected from health emergencies, and 1 billion more enjoy better health and well-being. WHO estimates that achieving this triple billion target could save 29 million lives. And today is the International Day to End Obstetric Fistula. An estimated 2 million women in sub-Saharan Asia and Arab region, Latin America, and the Caribbean are living with obstetric fistula, and some 50 to 100,000 new cases are developed worldwide each year. However, this injury is almost entirely preventable, and this day seeks to raise awareness to the importance of timely access to obstetric care for all women around the world. Tomorrow, I will be joined at the briefing by Muhannad Hadi, the World Food Programme's Regional Director for the Middle East, North Africa, and Central Asia and East Europe. Mr. Hadi oversees some of WFP's most difficult operations in Yemen, Syria, and the regional effort to assist Syrian refugees in Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, and Turkey. If you are looking for something to do to kick off the Memorial Day weekend, this Friday at 7 p.m., our colleagues of the UN Chamber Music Society will have a concert at the All Saints Episcopal Church, where you're able to enjoy an hour of music. And this is in partnership with a new initiative at Yale Music School that promotes music by composers from diverse backgrounds. We have reached almost the magical century mark in our honor roll. The Lao People's Democratic Republic has become the 99th member to pay its dues in full. And if you allow me a small cricket reference, we will go to the Anglo-Saxon in honor of cricket. James.
About the Palestinians signing up to 3 different international organizations and the effect that is likely to have because of the US congressional acts that are in place from 1990 and 1994 on their funding. I know that UNIDO is not US funded, but how worried are you about the funding of UNCTAD? And can I ask you about the OPCW, because it seems to be a bit of a grey area. It appears on your UN system map as a related organisation. The Act says affiliated. Does the UN believe the OPCW is affiliated to the UN?
The OPCW is independent treaty-based body affiliated with the United Nations. Whether it's UNCTAD, UNIDO, PCW, all these 3 entities have their own governing bodies, which are separate from the Secretary General and the Secretariat. They all have their own procedures for accession. For the Secretary General's part, his position remains that the focus should be on getting the parties back to the table for a negotiated outcome to lead to a 2-state solution. I'm not going to predict what the United States or other member states may or may not do in terms of the developments that we are seeing today.
Is the Secretary General, though, worried about the prospect that there could be defunding?
Again, I think our focus remains on the peace process, and I'm not going to speculate. Mr. Lee.
Sure. On that topic, and then I want to ask you about Anti-Corruption Day. But I think, and tell me if I'm wrong, that the Secretary General in one of his meetings with executives in Montreux had actually, I've seen the agenda. The agenda included this line: how to thrive without U.S./Western funding, learn from the experience of UNIDO and UNESCO in this regard. And so I'm just wondering, it seems like the UN has some contingency plans. Can you one, confirm that there has been such a discussion, and two,
no,
is UNIDO, in his view, is UNIDO thriving, given that many countries have withdrawn from it?
I'm not able to confirm the agenda of that meeting. And second, I think you'd have to ask UNIDO. As I said, these are specialized agencies who are responsible for their own funding. We obviously, as a matter of principle, we want to see an active and engaged United States and active and engaged member states in the multilateral system.
Sure. I wanted to ask you about this, the Convention Against Corruption. I did notice in his speech that he called for free press and civil society, exposing wrongdoing, and said that the UN's role is essential and to lead by example. So I wanted to ask you again, I'm sorry to do this, but there's a current case in the Southern District of New York of Patrick Ho and the China Energy Fund Committee, where it was just described in when he was held over in jail, Patrick Ho, that this corrupted many individuals in the UN and the institution itself. This was said in the courtroom. So given that, can you explain why the Secretary General, in the spirit of leading by example, hasn't even held an OIOS audit of how deeply this ran, and why China Energy Fund Committee remains? I know you're going to say it's member states.
Well, that happens to be a fact.
How does
so
he know?
that happens
Okay.
to be a fact. As I've said, we have fully cooperated with the federal authorities on this case.
Is that
Yes.
leading by example?
Yes.
I'm saying
Yes.
that's enough.
Thank you,
Go ahead.
Stéphane. About Syria, as you might so some those reports, news reports about ethnic-based forced displacement, violence, still continues in Afrin. Why we haven't heard for a while from the UN and OCHA about the humanitarian situation in Afrin?
We'll see what update we can get. Last I was briefed, we were not present right in the center of Afrin. We have reported on the displacements that the fighting has caused. We want to see a halt to the fighting and the displacement wherever it takes place in Syria. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Stéphane. My question is on Libya. I got the draft of the agreement that President Macron of France is trying to reach between Premier Sarraj and General Haftar at the conference in Paris on May 29. An agreement that actually would overcome the role of the UN envoy Salamé and the international community. Do you have any comment on that? And does SG had any contact with President Macron on the matter?
Contacts have been had at various levels with the French authorities, but I have no comment on the draft. Linda and then Evelyn.
Thank you, Steph. This is in regard to Myanmar. Amnesty International issued a report that a militant group associated with the Rohingya massacred, I guess about nearly 100 Buddhists and Hindus last year. And I guess my question is, I know this is an issue that's just come up. Has the Secretary General made a statement about this or reacted to it?
I think any and all reports of human rights violations are extremely concerning. Civilians, whatever their religion, their confession, their ethnicity, should be able to live in peace without fear of being assaulted or killed or burnt out of their homes by extremist groups. We have always pushed for greater access in Rakhine State, and including for our human rights monitors. Evelyn and then Stéphane.
In a follow-up to Linda's question, is there any analysis of which Rohingya group and when and where, and so forth from the UN?
I would refer you to the report that was just come out. I have not seen anything from
Amnesty.
From our end.
You
Yep.
mean? Secondly, Fistula. How can that be reduced or stopped without UNFPA? Given the money and the
Well,
staff.
I think UNFPA is obviously is funded. We know the issues relating to funding from the United States, but we've always encouraged other donors to fully fund UNFPA. The fight against fistula is not only a medical one, but it is one of ostracizing women who suffer from it. So it is also a social fight in that sense. Stefano.
Yes, I know this question has been asked before, but now we are a few hours away from, few days away from a new Italian government coming in. And the program of the Italian of this government, there is the idea to expel about 500,000 of migrants, illegal migrants. Now, also relating to Libya and Libya stability and all this, is the Secretary General worried about the situation if the Italian government change policy, especially also with the waves of migrants coming from...
We're not going to, I think like a lot of people, we're watching to see what happens in Italy. There are internal discussions going on about forming a new government. So I'm not going to speculate about what the policies of any government that's not in power, not in charge. So that's one thing. There's a question of principle which applies to every country, which the Secretary General has often repeated, that refugees have certain rights, countries have obligations towards them, that migrants need to be treated with respect, with dignity. And his message has been to encourage every country to participate actively in the discussions on the Global Compact on migration. So we come to some general understanding and agreement between countries of origin, countries of transit, and countries of destination, while always respecting the sovereignty of every member state. Yes, sir.
Sure. I wanted to ask you.
Go ahead.
Okay. There was a lot of celebration when Saudi Arabia said that they were going to allow women to drive, but recently a number of the activists that actually brought that policy change about have been arrested and charged with, quote, suspicious contact with foreign parties and security and against the security and stability of the state. So I wondered, given the things the Secretary General has said about the need for gender equality, et cetera, what does he make of these arrests?
What is important as a matter of principle is that civil society be given the space and freedom to operate. So, yes, ma'am.
I have a question on Macedonia. Do we have now a deal between Macedonia and Greece, a name dispute, country name, people's name, how are we going to call them, and the language?
Those discussions are ongoing, and as you know, Mr. Nimitz has been at this for quite some time, so I think when a deal is struck and agreed upon, we will have an announcement, but I have nothing to announce at this point. Matthew.
Sure. I wanted to ask you on it's both about IAEA, but also generally about the UN system and accountability for sexual harassment charges. I'd asked, I guess while you were away, I'd asked Ferhan about whether he was aware of whistleblowers in the IAEA saying that the Deputy Director General, Mr. Tero Vergeranta, who recently left, he had been in charge of JCPOA and Department of Safeguards, that the reason that he left was an Office of Internal Oversight investigation of sexual harassment. And I'm asking you because the victims themselves and the whistleblowers are saying he's left with a full pension, he left with Ferhan saying that it was for personal reasons. And so I guess I want to know, does the Secretary General believe, and this comes up in the Luis Luris case at UNAIDS and Frank LaRue at UNESCO, is this enough? Can problems such as this be sort of run out to the end of pension? And it's said in IAEA that Director General Amano knew of this, didn't order any investigation, and there was only investigation because the whistleblowers contacted the OIO there directly, and they're very troubled by that.
You know, a lot of these questions have to be addressed to the IAEA. They're responsible, and they have their own administrative structures. I think the message from the Secretary General to all the heads of agency was, when he met them as CB, was on the importance of combating sexual harassment, on creating environments in which victims could come forward, and on strengthening the investigative practices.
But
Thank you.
In this time,
Go ahead.
Stéphane, New York Times quoted an independent research that shows Iran could potentially, in a hidden side, is developing ICBM, long-range missile. I just wanted to know exactly what is the Secretary General's position about Iran developing long-range missiles.
I'm not going to comment what independent experts say. They are Security Council resolutions. There's a JCP, and there are others that need to be respected. The Secretary General's position is broadly for disarmament and not more armament.
Can I ask a straight-up question about this? Should the heads of agencies begin investigations when they're told about these things? And if they don't, what should happen?
Good afternoon. Today, the President, in cooperation with the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, is convening a high-level debate to mark the 15th anniversary of the adoption of the UN Convention Against Corruption. In his opening remarks, the President said the battle against corruption is not one that can be fought alone. Although the primary responsibility lies in the hands of governments, journalists also have a big role to play as watchdogs. The private sector, civil society, and academia are also key players. He concluded that corruption is still too destructive, too common, and too accepted in our world today, but the power is in our hands to alter these facts and create a new reality. Let us use this forum today as a step towards doing just that. His full remarks are on our website. Also speaking in the opening segment were the Secretary General and the Executive Director of the UN Office on Drugs and Crime. Ministerial and other high-level representatives of member states spoke this morning and will continue this afternoon. A panel discussion is now being held on the Convention's implementation and related trends, achievements, and challenges. And a second one will be held after 3 p.m. on achieving peaceful and inclusive societies through preventing and combating corruption. The President will then deliver closing remarks, and this is all happening today in the Trusteeship Council chamber. At 1:30 p.m., the President will meet with the Secretary General's Special Envoy for Myanmar, Ms. Christine Schraner-Burgener. Also this afternoon, the President will meet separately with Mexico's Minister for Public Service and the Commissioner of the National Supervisory Commission of China. They both spoke in the high-level segment of today's meeting on the UN Convention Against Corruption. We'll issue readouts for both of those meetings after they take place, and the President will also be having dinner tonight with the Foreign Minister of Greece. And that's it from me. Any questions? Yes?
Yes, I try also with President of the General Assembly about the same question asked before. There is a new government coming in Italy that they have a program that has been read, and in the program there is the plan to expel about 500,000 of migrants, illegal migrants that they say that they at the moment are in Italy. Now, is the President of the General Assembly concerned about this kind of policy that could be like also bring more instability in the Mediterranean? I mean, Italy is probably the country the most affected with this new wave of migrants, and there has been any discussion. I know there is meeting, for example, the Foreign Minister of Greece. I'm sure that probably this topic will be also on the agenda.
Well, I don't think that I'd want to comment on any policies that may or may not be adopted by a government that may or may not be elected. But in general, when it comes to migration, the President feels that questions like yours are exactly why we need a global compact on safe, orderly, and regular migration. That's why the member states are discussing this compact. That's why it'll be the first ever of its kind. That's why the world will finally have a common platform, a common understanding of what migration means and how we can ensure that it's safe, orderly, and regular, and that everyone is benefiting from it. So, as you might know, from our side, the compact is expected to be finalized in July. That's coming up soon, and then it'll be eventually adopted in December, and then endorsed by the General Assembly. So that's where our focus comes when it comes to migration. Yeah, Matthew.
Sure. I wanted to the meeting with the Special Envoy for Myanmar. Is this in the context because the General Assembly is the one that sort of created the mandate for the post? I mean, does he expect this envoy to periodically report to the General Assembly, or is it? I'm just trying to understand, because I know that there are many special envoys, but it's it's heartening to see that he's meeting with her, but maybe you can give some background of why, in this case, yes, and in other cases, no.
Well, the president meets with a wide range of actors, including secretariat officials, including other United Nations officials. So it's not unusual that he would meet with the Secretary General's envoy. And when it comes to Myanmar, he has been following the issue closely. He had considered what was happening with the Rohingya, for example, to be a human tragedy. He's discussed the issue with various interlocutors, including with officials from Bangladesh. So it's definitely on his radar. The meeting has not happened yet. We will definitely tweet about it when it happens, as we do with all of our meetings. So I would encourage you to follow him on Twitter and see what we say about it.
And I wanted to ask you about one other meeting. I see that at least that he's set to meet the president of ECOSOC, the
Yes.
permanent representative of the Czech Republic. And I wanted, and again, I think I've asked you this, and you said it was sort of smaller than the type of issues he deals with. Given the speeches today on the Convention Against Corruption, and given that this China Energy Fund Committee is in special consultative status with ECOSOC, even as its #1 UN representative is in jail for using the entity to have allegedly paid bribes to Sam Kutesa, I'm wondering, the president hasn't taken any move to act on this, and I've noted that the funder of China Energy Fund Committee, Ye Jimin, was a personal financial advisor to the president of the Czech Republic, and I'm saying that with all due respect. And so I'm just wondering...
Well, the Czech Republic is not where he's from, first of all.
Say again?
He's not from the Czech Republic.
No, I understand. He's meeting, I'm saying the president of ECOSOC
sure, I mean,
represents
these kinds of
the
issues
president of
sure,
Czech Republic.
I mean, just to clarify what the context is, I mean, this is part of his monthly meeting with the president of ECOSOC, just like he meets with the president of the Security Council, with the Secretary General every month, and that's to foster coordination amongst UN organs. The General Assembly does have a role when it comes to strengthening ECOSOC. There's a whole process underway related to that. Regarding the issue that you're referring to about the China Energy Fund Committee, I mean, we've talked about it before. The president has no role with that. Whatever NGOs are accredited to ECOSOC is a matter for ECOSOC to deal with. I don't know of any plans to bring this issue up at the meeting today. So I think there's nothing more really for me to add on that.
I'm going to ask one follow-up, which is that I'm very clear that he's not from the Czech Republic. My question was, I guess it has to do with a kind of a structural issue. If a country, it's a very abnormal situation, but you could read about it in the Czech press, the Ye Jimin, a Chinese billionaire that's now gone missing, was a personal financial advisor to the president of the Czech Republic, while the Czech Republic is the president of ECOSOC. So it seems... Are there any provisions for recusal? Who would make a request to act on...
This is not something for me to comment on as the spokesperson for President Lajčák. I mean, this sounds like something that maybe you should direct to...
Well, I've written, as you know, to Mr. Bob Simon or Paul Simon a number of times and have received no response at all.
I wish you luck in that quest.
Okay.
Yes.
Speaking of ECOSOC, I don't know, is there going to be to the GA a summary of their decisions on NGOs, the NGO committee, both the rejections and the acceptance? Because we're all watching that. They have a...
You're talking about NGOs that are accredited to the Economic and Social Council?
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be a matter for the Economic and Social Council. I mean, that's not really for us. We don't have NGOs accredited to the General Assembly.
But they don't give you results of their meeting.
It's not for us to report on what the Economic and Social Council is doing.
Yeah.
Any other questions about the General Assembly? No. Great. Thank you very much.